Sweet Potato Cave. On February 27, 2004, a group of Boy Scouts gathered at the entrance of Sweet Potato Cave in rural Kentucky. It was a bitter winter morning, and frost still covered the surrounding hills. Among the group was 14-year-old Jesse Gott, a scout known for his adventurous spirit. The boys had explored this cave before and were familiar with its layout. Spirits were high as they prepared to descend underground. Sweet Potato Cave is part of a limestone cave system hidden in the Kentucky woodlands. Its narrow passages, carved by underground water over thousands of years, wind deep into the earth. The entrance is small and surrounded by trees, with paths that vary from tight crawls to moderately sized chambers. Though the group had been inside the cave previously, some passages required careful navigation, even for experienced cavers. Equipped with helmets and headlamps, the group entered the cave in the late morning. The initial descent was uneventful. They passed through the first chambers without difficulty. Deeper inside, the group encountered a vertical crack along one of the walls. The opening was tight, barely wide enough for a person to fit. Scout leader Andrew Duncan advised caution and told the group not to enter the gap. It was too narrow and not part of the planned route. Jesse, however, ignored the warning and attempted to squeeze into the crevice alone. At first, he made progress, but after several feet, he became stuck. His chest was compressed tightly between the limestone walls. He could not move forward or backward. Attempts to reposition his arms or legs failed. The more he struggled, the worse it became. His breathing became shallow and erratic. Andrew immediately came to Jesse's side and realized the seriousness of the situation. Other scouts gathered nearby. Jesse's eyes were wide and his lips pale. The ambient temperature in the cave was low, and the rock walls pulled heat from his body. Within minutes, signs of hypothermia began to appear. His fingers became numb, and his muscles began to shake uncontrollably. Some of the scouts exited the cave to call for help. Emergency responders were dispatched immediately. Local rescue personnel, experienced in confined space operations, entered the cave and made their way toward Jesse. By the time rescuers reached him, he had been trapped for over an hour. He was alert, but exhausted. His face was pale, and his body temperature had dropped significantly. The rescue team applied thermal blankets and chemical heating pads. They monitored his condition while assessing how to extract him safely. Using crowbars, hammers, and small chisels, the rescuers began to widen the narrow gap. The limestone was solid, and progress was slow. They worked in shifts, careful not to dislodge rocks above Jesse's head. Throughout the operation, Jesse remained conscious, occasionally responding to questions, but his strength was fading. Over the next 2 hours, rescuers removed enough rock to create space for extraction. A coordinated pull allowed them to gently slide Jesse out of the crevice. He was immediately lifted onto a stretcher and carried out of the cave. Outside, an ambulance was waiting. He was transported to a nearby hospital, where doctors confirmed mild hypothermia but no permanent injuries. His core temperature was stabilized, and he was discharged later that evening. Wildcat Cave Tragedy. On October 5, 1965, children from a Methodist foster home boarded a bus for a routine trip to a nearby village. Along the way, the bus suffered a flat tire, and the journey took an unexpected turn. With no immediate fix available, the group stopped near Wildcat Cave to pass the time. Among the children was Morris Patel, who, along with his friends, eagerly entered the cave. The group began exploring freely. Wildcat Cave was known for its twisting, narrow passages and sudden drops, easy to get lost in. As they moved deeper inside, Morris got separated from the group. He called out, but no one answered. He tried to retrace his steps, but had already taken a wrong turn. The deeper he went, the tighter the cave became. He followed a slippery downward slope and came to a narrow gap between two massive boulders. Hoping it led back to the entrance, he attempted to squeeze through headfirst. Halfway through, one of the boulders shifted. The rock pinned his torso against the wall, leaving only his legs exposed. He was stuck. His arms were trapped at his sides, and breathing became difficult. He tried to pull himself out, but the harder he struggled, the more he wedged himself in. Meanwhile, his friends had already exited the cave. Believing Morris had gone ahead, no one noticed he was missing for over an hour. When his absence was finally discovered, group leader William Paul returned to the cave with 2 boys to search for him. They eventually found Morris wedged in the crevice, his face pressed against the rock. Paul tried to keep him calm. He looped his belt around Morris's leg and pulled, hoping the slick stone might let him slide free. But the belt snapped, and Morris's face slammed into the wall, causing a deep cut. Realizing the situation was beyond his ability, Paul called for professional help. Fire Chief Paul Cadera and his team arrived shortly after. They attempted to use metal hooks to extract Morris, but failed. The space was too tight. Oxygen was piped into the gap, and lights were set up to illuminate the scene. Drilling was considered, but ruled out due to the risk of collapse. Dynamite was never an option. As hours passed, news of the trapped boy spread nationally. Rescuers appealed for small, flexible volunteers. Nurse Evelyn Pinky Petite, just over 5 feet tall, arrived from Akron and crawled into the cave. She spent nearly 3 hours beside Morris, keeping him warm and awake. Later, experienced cave explorer Terry Brown helped set up a pulley system. Ropes were tied to secure points inside the cave, and multiple people coordinated each pull. But Morris only moved a few inches. His body was swollen, bruised, and pressed tightly between rock. By the next morning, Morris had been trapped for over 24 hours. He had received no food or water. Cold temperatures worsened his condition. Desperate for a solution, rescuers brought in 17-year-old Eagle Scout Michael Yid. He was small, calm, and had caving experience. The final plan was risky. Morris's body was coated in a slippery glycerin solution. Soft ropes were tied around his ankles, torso, and underarms. Yid crawled in, reached his legs, and secured the loops. On command, the team pulled. Morris moved. Then he slipped back. They reset and tried again. With every coordinated effort, they gained a few more inches. Finally, after multiple failed attempts, the rock released its grip. Morris was pulled free. Rescuers wrapped him in blankets and carried him out of the cave. He was rushed to the hospital and treated for exhaustion, dehydration, deep bruising, and a facial laceration. He had survived over 24 hours wedged inside a limestone crack. Shortly after, officials sealed Wildcat Cave to prevent further incidents. John Young Cave. On February 12, 2022, experienced cavers John Young and Marvin Miller set out to explore a newly discovered cave in Texas. The system had only recently been uncovered, and its deep pits and narrow fissures posed a real challenge for even seasoned explorers. For the two friends, it was the perfect opportunity to combine adventure with discovery. After a 10-foot or 3-meter down climb near the entrance, they reached a belly crawl that forced them to squeeze through several tight fissures. Eventually, the narrow path opened into a larger room. At the far end, Young noticed a small 4-foot-deep slot leading into a tighter space. Always drawn to the more difficult route, he decided to investigate further. He slipped through the fissure and reached a small chamber overlooking a deeper pit. At first, the tight passage had seemed manageable. But when he attempted to return, Young realized he had a problem. No matter how he twisted or pushed, he couldn't climb back through the same narrow slot. The space was simply too tight, and the rock offered no footholds or leverage to pull himself back up. He was stuck. From below, the fissure squeezed into his abdomen, hips, and upper legs with relentless pressure. Every attempt to shift his position only seemed to make things worse. His stomach was pressed hard against the rock, and his legs were pinned beneath him. Breathing became more difficult as the constriction around his waist tightened. Miller quickly understood the urgency of the situation. He exited the cave and returned with tools: a hammer, chisel, and rope. He began widening the shaft manually, chipping away at the surrounding stone to free his friend. But despite his efforts, the progress was minimal. The gap was simply too narrow for any meaningful escape. Realizing he needed help, Miller left the cave again and called for professional rescue. Within a short time, a specialized rescue team arrived on site. It included cave experts and members of the local EMS and fire department. Together, they formulated a plan to extract Young from the rock's grip. Once they reached him, the rescuers began carefully chiseling away the stone around his waist and hips. Every strike had to be calculated. Too much pressure in the wrong spot could cause the rock to shift unpredictably or collapse. To assist with the extraction, the team rigged a pulley system and brought in small rocks, which they carefully placed beneath Young's feet to provide him with some leverage. Though in constant pain, Young remained calm throughout. The crushing pressure around his groin and abdomen was nearly unbearable, and the extended immobility caused his muscles to cramp severely. Still, he focused on timing his movements with the rescuers' efforts. With the crevice widened just enough and a solid foothold beneath him, Young began to push upward with what strength he had left. At the same time, rescuers above coordinated their pull through the pulley system. Progress was slow, but steady. Each inch gained brought him closer to freedom. Finally, after several hours of intense work, John Young was freed from the fissure. He was lifted out of the cave and assessed by medical personnel. Aside from severe bruising, exhaustion, and muscle soreness, he had escaped serious injury. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.